Prince Albert Victor, Duke of Clarence and Avondale, was a nephew of Queen Victoria, King in waiting, and was guilty of taking advantage of drug pleasures as the next man. Now, there is a theory that he sent a letter to his confederate in London to initiate various stages of the culling of the degraded city, postulations centre around him, reassuring himself that the only difference between his friends and him was that he felt he was aware of the disgusting nature of modern industrialisation and leisure. Now, eventually, it would lead to the downfall of organic solidarity itself. Bearing in mind that Sir Robert Peel set the police up as a consensual organisation, consensual between society and the public, it must be remembered though that such serial killings are made in thoughts and ideals long held within the mind of the public, and even famous minds. That the Krays, for example, back in the day, the Krays were indicative of the sort of criminal which could be upheld as the theory that perhaps there's always been criminality in the UK, and should we not perhaps take that into account when condemning the past as opposed to the future. For example, they're well known throughout history as being psychotic and pathologically insane, in particular Ronnie. It's important to remember that there were specific no-go areas for law enforcement at the time, back in the 60s, and that such instances as the brothers were rare back in the day. But it is important to remember that the modern indoctrination of DEI and the fallacy of the international human rights systems put in place after the 1987, these are pertinent. Again, it is necessary to stipulate that we have a self-regulating police force, not through the state, looking after the quality of British life. Or at least we did have all of these things. Or at least, that's how the job was originally founded. Our police are famously meant to be unarmed, whilst nobody obeys them without official consent. That was the theory again. All of this goes back to cultural assimilation, thus demonstrating the power of individuality. This power is particularly notable in one of the most famous cases of the 19th century, and we get back to the impatient king, Prince Albert Victor again. Our impatient monarch, through the officers of the day, used actively to respond to criminal corruption from any quarter than actually reward bad behaviour, such as been seen in aristocratic society today. Bad language and disgustingly wafted food in public are prolific and permeate, whilst the average person is persecuted for having the wrong set of books on their shelves. I am instantly reminded of the rhyme artist Stormzy, who has recently been awarded a doctorate and allowed to set up a specific undergraduate scheme to encourage Africans to attend Oxford. Now, while this is laudable and fantastic idea, it does bleed into the fragmentation and alienation of tribalist nature of social norms and work against cultural assimilation. This leads us back to the norms we see in the media sector today and the obsequious accusations that have proliferated in the press and on X. It was in 1888 when letters were sent to the Central News Agency citing responsibility for one of the most outrageous crimes imaginable at the time. An interesting note, but is it genuine? We ask ourselves, some books written think that Jack wrote a diary and was in fact a wealthy Liverpool merchant, James Maybrick, but it is not taken very seriously though, and it shows this bias towards the sort of drama that the case has had for 120 years and the need to look at other instances. The case for Maybrick being the Ripper seemed almost certain by Dan Cranston in 1959 upon his discovery of a man who claimed to have remembered the pamphlet being distributed in Australia around 1890 entitled the East End murderer. I knew him. Though there is very little evidence with which to prove his guilt, Peter Turnbull, however, wrote in his book The Killer Who Never Was, as the idea that Jack Ripper was a product of sensationalism and mass media circulation of the press. Now, of course, we find all these things on Netflix even today. Mass media sensationalism and serial killer documentaries of that type, all sensationalist in nature and try to inspire, try to quell the masses. Of course, the most famous lot, an opinion that has been hyped and speculated on with increasing environment, is the involvement of Prince Albert Victor. Now we get back down to the case again. Prince Albert Victor, Duke of Clarence and Avondale, grandson of the reigning monarch, Queen Victoria. This opinion was examined by Thomas Stowell, who in 1970 published an article in the Criminologist called A Solution. Again, drama rears its ugly head. Stowell used the private papers of Sir William Gull as his primary source material throughout his article. The killer is referred to as S, but there is enough private evidence to identify the culprit, to identify the prince as the chief culprit. This is in dispute, especially given that it's a proven fact that he was in Scotland at the time of the Catherine's Meadow murder at least. It must also be considered that he was of ill health at the time. He died in 1891 and 1992 of influenza, of the influenza epidemic at the time. He could of course have had an accomplice in the streets of London during his work for him, although this is a highly contentious postulation. A high contender for this instance being Montague John Druitt, who was another such suspect and the son of a medical practitioner, though he was discovered drowned in the Thames River in December 31st, 1888. However, in 1903, Detective Inspector Frederick Aberline, who was in charge of the case, stated to the Pall Mall Gazette, "Scotland Yard is really no wiser on the subject than it was 15 years ago." I think he should have asked all the suspects for their national digital identification cards. So we are left in the 21st century with an overwhelming sense of depersonalization. It's probable we must take control officially of our guarding regulatory body again, that is to say the police force. Only by doing this can we see the effects that have been put upon it through religious version of language that is woke puritanism. Give us a good clicking.
Shakanaka.